Welcome to Legislative Watch. I'm your host, Elizabeth Allan Hodge. Today we are recording from the Capitol Annex, where the Idaho State Legislature is presently holding session. My guests are Representative JoAn Wood, who is in her 14th term representing the good folks from District 35. JoAn is the Chairman of Transportation and Defense. She's the Senior Member of Resource and Conservation and is a sitting member on the House Revenue and Taxation Committee. With her, Representative Cliff Bayer, who is in his 4th term from District 21 here in Ada County. Cliff is a member of JFAC, Local Government, Business, is the co-chair of the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee, or JLOC, and the co-chair of the Economic Outlook Committee. So welcome to the program.
Thank you.
JoAn, as chairman of the Transportation and Defense Committee, I understand the transportation part of it, and we're really going to get into that, but I'd like you to tell us what the defense part is.
The defense part is really interesting and important because we don't have a counterpart in the Senate. The House is the only one that has the Defense Committee, and we have the privilege of talking with and working with our National Guard.
Oh.
And we also do anything to do with the Mountain Home Air Force Base. We do Homeland Security and those things to do with military. We've had quite a few pieces of legislation. We have about 3 that came through this year for our Idaho National Guard. We talk about in there how we as a state handle when our National Guard is called up and they come back to our state. We ask our employers to keep a job open for them and help them in that regard. We've talked about some of the insurance benefits for our servicemen that are called up. We've talked about family support, relations and that type of thing while our military are serving in Iraq and those kinds of things. The Veterans Hospital, much of that goes through our committee. So a lot of things connected to the military in our state go through our committee. And then from our committee, a lot of they go pretty much to the they go right out on the floor, but then they go over in the Senate, I believe, to the State Affairs Committee.
Okay, so are those funding issues, are they resolutions, or is there a combination?
There's a combination, yes.
Okay, wonderful. All right, now, I know, again, with transportation, you have a lot to do with Garvey. I wonder if you could, for our listeners, define what Garvey is and how it works.
Yes, Garvey is a bonding process whereby you can float bonds. It goes through the Idaho Housing Program, or that's where it originated, to be able to raise bonds for payment of infrastructure. They do put the bonds out for sale and raise so much money, and then they utilize that money to do projects for the Department of Transportation. Most of it's been done in the Treasure Valley. Then it is predicated upon the payment back by obligating federal fuel tax dollars that come to the state. And we are a donee state. We receive more money back than we pay in. Most states, when they pay the fuel tax in, then it is calibrated in Washington, D.C. and then put back to the states, which is kind of a tough way because they eat their bit out of it before it comes back. But we are lucky because some years back I went with the plea to the transportation chair in Congress that we had so many miles of highway in the state of Idaho that go to national monuments, national forests, all kinds of national buildings and that type of thing, and particularly tourist attractions that the citizens of this state with such a low population have to pay to maintain those highways and the access to those recreation places. But so I made the case that we really needed more than we were able to generate in the state of Idaho on the low population. And we were lucky they bought that and went back, and in the appropriation we got 134% of what we pay. And that has helped us be able to maintain roads and access to our national installations. And we have real concerns that will be in the next appropriation by the federal government on the transportation dollars, because all the other states are in the same position we are of a shortfall, and they're going to be demanding the amount that they pay in. Some of the states are getting 82% back, some about 94% back. And I know I'm in a national organization with those states, and I'm hearing the rumbling that they're unhappy with some of the smaller states getting more than their share and them getting less than what they pay in.
Okay, well, now...
you asked me about Garvey, and that's
yes.
how we pay back the bonds, is those dollars that are obligated, but they're obligated, Liz, for 25 years.
Okay, now how much has actually been allocated?
We have borrowed at this particular time, sold bonds in a little under $600 million.
Wow.
Our interest on that per year is $47 million that we're paying.
Just on the interest alone?
On the interest alone.
Wow.
If we are to raise new funds this year, what we're looking at in the way of raising new funds, if we pass the bills to do it, will about cover the interest on the bonds, and that'll be about it.
So how much has been spent to date, total?
I think a little under the $600 million.
Okay.
And I take that back. I believe there's about $300 million out right now that they're just letting the bids on.
Okay, now can you tell us what projects have actually been completed?
There is none that have been completed.
Okay. And what projects do we have under construction?
We have 2 in North Idaho. We have 4 in the Treasure Valley. We have 1 in all of southeastern Idaho from Boise south. It's at Lava Hot Springs.
Okay. And do you have any idea when any of these projects might, any projected time for completion? At one time, I think they projected that it would be 14 years before they would have them completed. I don't know if that's changed. Are you aware, if of any deadline that they feel like they're going to get any of it completed?
I think that's really staggered. It depends on the project, and they all have different logistics in regards to environmental impacts and how big the project is. But they're on from several years to out, like you're saying, on some of the larger projects.
Well, one of the questions is if we're paying like $47 million in interest, and this thing goes on, and we bond for more. I'm just wondering how this is going to affect what we're doing, in terms of dollars coming in, and I also wanted you to talk a little bit about STIP and how that affects maintenance.
And I can do that, and it may be interesting to know that we were told at the beginning when Garvey was proposed that it would not affect the STIP in any way, but it most certainly has dried up the funds that have been able to go out because costs have gone up considerably. And the projects, they started out with 13 and figured $1.6 billion would cover the 13 projects, and they've had to scale it back to 6.
Would you explain for just a minute to our listeners what STIP stands for?
Yes, that's your Statewide Transportation Infrastructure Plan.
Okay, so Garvey having to deal with mostly improvements and the roads as we see on I-84, we can see that in the Treasure Valley. That's separate from maintenance of like bridges and old roads that may need some resurfacing.
That's true, and the problem we have with that is that we have it isn't really getting the surfacing of the roads done. In the audit, they told us we were $137 million short in just maintenance and preservation of our highways, and that we had a method of going about managing our money of doing the worst first instead of preserving the best as we go along, which would be much more cost effective. And so the audit was really critical of the way that we've been doing managing the money that we have.
Okay, well, when we get back from the break, one of the things I'd like to talk a little bit more is about the audit, what you found out in the audit, and also what alternate plans are to maybe fund some of the maintenance operations, because from what you're telling us, that's going to be an ongoing problem, especially as bridges get old, and we have to be able to maintain those for safety, being probably our number one concern. Okay, I'm Elizabeth Allan Hodge. We'll continue this discussion after the break. Welcome back to Legislative Watch. I'm Elizabeth Allan Hodge. Today we have Representative JoAn Wood, who's in her 14th term representing District 35 and is the Chairman of Transportation and Defense, and we've been talking a lot about transportation. With her we have Representative Cliff Bayer, who's in his 4th term in the Idaho House of Representatives, and he serves the good people from District 21. Prior to the break, JoAn, we were talking about the fact that Garvey, which is funding all of the new construction that we see on I-84, and there are other areas in northern Idaho and different parts of the state where projects are going on our roads. However, that's new construction, and STIP, which stands for State Transportation...
Statewide Transportation Infrastructure Plan.
Okay. None of the Garvey money goes to that.
That's
and so for existing bridges and roads that may be falling in disrepair as they've aged, how are those things funded?
That goes through your highway transportation fund, and it's the normal gas tax and registration and those kinds of things that go into that fund, and that's what has been going down very fast. The biggest criticism that the audit gave was that it had been terribly neglected, the maintenance and preservation of the best we had. And they repeated that several times in the audit, saying that we were going the wrong direction in putting any new projects in place, because they create then more maintenance. And we're already so far behind in maintenance and preservation that all the new projects do is add to that load until we have some way to deal with that.
Well, now, how is this going to affect our budget? We've obviously experiencing a shortfall, and the budget is on the minds and hearts of everybody, especially with our economic outlook right now. How are we going to pay for the infrastructure and keep Garvey going and pay back Garvey? Are we talking about increase in fuel taxes? Are we talking about increase in taxes, period?
Yes, we are. The governor has come with a package of, I believe, 6 possible fundraisers, and we did print the bills for the people to be able to get a look at that. He's suggesting that it be carried out over a 5-year period. The legislature that I have talked to, legislators are reluctant to lock us in for a 5-year program, because we're locked in on the Garvey, and they're very unhappy about that.
Sure.
And so the 5-year program, I'm not seeing a support for that out there in the legislature at all. And the governor has suggested a gas tax increase. Now, he has suggested 2 cents per year for 5 years, which would raise it at 10 cents in the end, and after 5 years. We have a bill that says we will raise 2 cents for 1 year and then see where we are. He also has a bill that raises the registration on vehicles, all vehicles, and we're looking at a new version of that. That would bring in the gas tax. If you went with 2 cents, would bring $17 million. If you went with 5 cents, which there's another bill that calls for, is $44 million. With the registration, I'm not sure exactly where we are on that yet. We're just getting
depending on what the amount is, right?
Right.
Okay.
And then he also wants to move the state police from the transportation budget and put it in the general fund.
Why?
And he has scheduled that because one of the criticisms in the audit is that we were weeding off too much money out of the Department of Transportation to Parks and Recreation, State Police, other things that were not related to preservation and maintenance of the highways and the bridges. And so he has suggested that because the state police have other duties related to drug interdiction and those other kinds of responsibilities, that it probably is a statewide responsibility, and that the funding probably should come from statewide funds.
Yeah, but of course then that's going to put even more of a strain on transportation, right?
No, it will actually leave the money in transportation.
Oh, I'm sorry, I misunderstood. So he's not saying that you take it from the transportation and put it in the general fund?
The opposite.
Just the opposite. Okay.
In other words, the state police are now getting their funds, $19 million, from the Department of Transportation budget.
Okay.
And he's suggesting it should be coming from the general fund and not from the transportation.
There you go.
And he is doing that for a 5-year period. We're actually looking at running that bill and seeing if there's a support there. I think the JFAC members, and you have one sitting here, may have something to say about that, because we have a severe downturn, and we didn't get good news this morning about the way our economy is.
Well, tell us about it, folks.
Well, I'm not sure what you want to talk about first. I'd like to just go back briefly to the audit to set the stage from the last legislative session. The audit was a long time coming, and it was something unlike anything we've ever done before. It was supported unanimously by the entire legislature, and there were significant concerns, and not just in regards to simple funding, but this is a performance audit in regards to efficiencies, priorities, management, all of the infrastructure, all of the administrative overhead, and the bidding process, the implications of Garvey, a rather global audit, and that had support from, again, the entire legislature and the executive branch. And through JLOC, that was implemented through the Office of Performance Evaluation and contracted out because it was of such a scale that was not something that could be done in-house.
Now, again, for our people that just might have tuned in, Cliff, JLOC is Joint Legislative Oversight Committee.
Correct. JLOC is an oversight committee which is made up exclusively of legislators from the House and the Senate, blend between the majority and minority party, and we conduct audits and performance evaluations, financial audits and such, through the Office of Performance Evaluation, we call OPE. And this is to find efficiencies and to be self-critical, if you will, of our various departments. And it can either be in regards to statute definitions of what our responsibilities are, all the way to a specific agency or department and how are they performing in all kinds of ways that I mentioned. And so this was a rather comprehensive global audit, and with all that information, there's been a lot to digest this year. The audit only came out towards the beginning of session. Actually, we tried to fast-track the release of that to the germane committees, to the Transportation Committee members, because a lot of the work lies with them on policy and revenue changes and accountability measures, if you will, and they have a lot of work to do. And of course, we're a part-time legislature. We're really compressed for time. We're trying to do more than full-time work in a few months.
You bet.
And with that information was released, and we moved on from there. Would you like to speak more to the audit at this point?
Well, yes, I would say that from what came from the audit, it enforced the concerns that we had why we asked for the audit in the first place. The year before, when we were trying to give the governor some help in his, by the way, he inherited this mess, and And he was trying to find some way to answer the shortfall and the difficulty we were having, particularly with the STIP.
Now, what do you mean he inherited this?
This Garvey and all was passed before Governor Otter was elected to be our governor.
Oh, that's right.
And so we were already into selling bonds and into the Garvey before the governor came on board. This governor came on board. To add to our concern for the Department of Transportation and why we asked for the audit was in 5 years we've had 3 governors. In 5 years we've had 3 chairmen of the boards of transportation. In 5 years we've had 3 directors of the Department of Transportation.
Wow.
And so we felt there was just a disconnect in continuity, and we could not get the figures that we felt like we wanted with when we were trying to come up with some funding possibilities we could offer the governor.
Wow. All right. Well, so what can you tell us a little bit more about, with this audit, what they found in terms of where there can be some cost savings? Or
Oh, yes, I can.
All right, let's get into that. We've got just a short time to talk about that, and then we can finish it after the next break.
There are 52 recommendations in this audit to the department how they can operate better, more efficiently, and many of them have a cost savings connected to them.
Okay, we'll get into those right after the break, because that'll be interesting to find out how that is. I'm Elizabeth Allan Hodge. The program is Legislative Watch. Welcome back to Legislative Watch. I'm your host, Elizabeth Allan Hodge, and today we're speaking with Representative JoAn Wood, who's in her 14th term representing District 35, and to Representative Cliff Bayer, who is in his 4th term in the Idaho House from District 21. Prior to the break, we were talking about the transportation audit that was ordered by the legislature, I guess, requested that JLOC order the transportation audit. Is that correct, Cliff?
That's correct.
And that there were apparently 52 recommendations that came out of that audit. Do we know what the total tax or cost savings will be to Idaho?
No, we do not know what the total is, cost savings. There's some recommendations that were made that do give us some figures. For instance, the results of the study indicated on average design-build project delivery reduced overall projection duration by 14%, reduced the total cost of projects by 3%, and maintained the same level of quality as compared to design-build project delivery. The study indicated a potential savings of $30,000 for every $1 million of cost, and a reduction of about 7.5 weeks for every project year. Another one that was interesting is an analysis of the effectiveness of both in-house and consultants for state-funded projects over the past 4 years indicates that the productivity ratios for each are very similar, about 7.5 to 1. This equates to $7.50 of construction output for every $1 spent on resources. Given the trade-off, ITD should endeavor to increase the utilization of its in-house resources when resources are available. And then it tells us that they may also save about, if I can find that, let's see, the savings can be realized from reducing the projected outsourcing costs for state-funded projects in future years. The savings in the first 5 years is conservatively estimated at $6.1 million and at least $3.5 million annually thereafter. These savings are dependent on the implementation of the internal maintenance management systems to accurately calculate cost-saving benefit trade-offs. And to make it short, they've recommended 3 management tools they must implement. That's an asset management tool, all the assets in transportation. Secondly, maintenance and preservation of the pavement, and then a financial management plan. Those 3 plans, and they've outlined in here a great cost savings. One of the auditors said it could save hundreds of millions of dollars if we were to implement
Okay,
that.
that's what I wanted to hear, because as I hear you talking about $30,000 for every $1 million spent and 7 weeks shorter, when we're spending just $47 million just on interest alone, that didn't sound very impressive, quite frankly. But you're saying it could go into hundreds of millions of dollars when you take into consideration all of the recommendations.
Yes, Elizabeth, one of the things that we were really concerned about was the arbitrage. And Cliff could probably speak to that. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but when they bid out and sold bonds, the first $200,000, they were not prepared internally to handle it. They did not have the expertise in-house, and so they put the money kind of in the bank, and actually they put it in the stock market.
Is this where they got the $6 million
This is 22.
zing for not spending it soon enough?
That's right.
So they were actually penalized. How much?
$22 million.
$22 million.
Yes.
See, there's
that was just a penalty.
Well, that's what they lost.
There's a problem because you're only as strong as your weakest link, and the bottleneck no more was financing flow. The bottleneck was application and infrastructure. If you have these monies and you can't manage them, then that also creates a problem. So and they didn't even. My understanding was they didn't have the blueprints and everything ready for some of the projects, and so they couldn't even proceed. If they weren't quite ready to spend the money, I thought that they had to park it someplace, and that's
well. And in the meantime, they hired a consulting firm, which was Connecting Idaho Partners, and the contracts that were made were way to the disadvantage of the Department of Transportation, and very much advantageous to the Connecting Idaho Partner Group. But they were the management group. They were the ones that could come in and do the management. But we paid a pretty high cost for that, and then lost the $22 million. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, what we're trying to do now is play catch up, and we're so far behind that we can't do it in 1 year. We've been quite a few years getting in this situation, and we can't ask the people in the state of Idaho to raise enough money in 1 year. That's why the governor is asking 5. We want to see what the Department of Transportation does with the audit recommendations. So we're willing to at least I think we may be willing to put out 1 year some help for the Department of Transportation.
Well, I think one of the concerns that our listeners is going to have, bottom line, is how is this going to affect their pocketbooks? Because we all know that we're in an economic downturn right now, and people are struggling. As a real estate broker, I can tell you I've actually seen people for the first time in 20 years losing homes.
Yes, they are.
Some property has been devalued as much as 60% plus. I mean, it's a great time to buy, but not such a great time if you have to sell, or if you bought at the high end of the market when you're seeing your property devalue.
And you can't make the house payments. That's the problem.
Exactly. In fact, I know of one military fellow who came back from overseas and couldn't keep up his payments when he got back because he couldn't get the kind of job that he needed and that he was trained for, and he lost his home. Now, that should never happen to guys that are standing guard so that we can be sitting here talking. So the bottom line for me is, and for our listeners is, what can we expect in terms of how this is going to affect Idaho families?
Well, I think Cliff can talk a bit about the financial outlook that we have now. It's going to affect the Department of Transportation as well as the rest of the state, but I'll let him talk about that.
Okay.
Well, it's important to remember a couple of principles in the sense that, of course, Idaho is fortunate to have, in my opinion, constitutional provision for balancing our budget. Mm-hmm. We've seen what other states that don't follow that guideline, what a mess they've fallen into. And as difficult and volatile as things are in Idaho, we have several neighboring states who are in even worse conditions. Now, to that extent, it's important for us to be self-critical and find efficiencies. It's a great responsibility with taxpayer dollar expenditures. In the Economic Outlook Committee that started the week before legislative session, one of the go-home messages was we are in a very unpredictable climate. It's very volatile, it's very difficult to calculate. It's very dynamic, but yet we have to set a budget. And of course, with this economy and with unemployment rate, with all the other negative implications, it's prudent for us to do everything we can to live within our budget.
You bet.
And so setting the target is important because, you know, we have a blend of one-time expenditures and then we have ongoing monies that we have ongoing obligations for, that we have a blend that we have to take into consideration how much of our revenues are one-time versus ongoing and how much of our expenditures match up with that. And we have to be very careful in the budget process of how we piece that together in order to meet a balanced budget. And with our best attempt in the current fiscal year, we fell short, hence the governor had to start issuing holdbacks. Fortunately, earlier than not, the earlier we do that, the easier it is, if you will, for various departments to react and to readjust their budgets. Well, we did more of that this morning, and so we are up to a point where we're holding back 6%, and we readjusted the 09 general revenue target to 12.2% less than fiscal year 08. So that's where we start. We're actually not even, we've gone to fiscal year 10, but a lot of action we've been taking in this legislative session has immediate implications into the current fiscal year 09, and that's absolutely critical. That's how dynamic the situation is. That's how dire we are right now with the budget process.
So you're talking about a 12% cut?
Well, it's, in a proportional relationship to the budget, the general fund budget from FY09. In 10, we went with the economic outlook forecast, which was $100 million less than the governor's, and the governor's was already a significant cut, and we also took action this morning to have a 5% cut with our state employees and our public school employees, and along with all the implications to benefit changes, reduction in inflationary adjustments, replacement items, statewide cost allocation, non-discretionary adjustments. It's very convoluted, but the bottom line message is we have to do some serious budget damage control to stay on track.
Okay, let's continue this conversation after the break. It sounds like the economic outlook is not all that cheery right now, but we'll discuss that when we come back. I'm Elizabeth Allan Hodge. The program is Legislative Watch. Welcome back to Legislative Watch. I'm your host, Elizabeth Allan Hodge, and today we have Representative JoAn Wood, who's in her 14th term representing folks from District 35. We've been talking also with Representative Cliff Baer, who's in his 4th term from District 21 here in Ada County. We've been talking about the transportation audit and the fact that there were 52 recommendations that came as a result in terms of some cost savings, hopefully to the state. Even with the 52 recommendations and hopefully hundreds of millions of dollars in the future here of savings, we're still in an economic crisis here in Idaho today, and I'd like to talk over the last segment about where we are and what types of things the legislature is doing to try and give some kind of relief to the taxpayers.
Well, it is very volatile and unpredictable, and that's what makes a lot of this so challenging. But we do have to take into consideration that it brings self-criticism to the process, and we have to look for efficiencies. We have to discern between wants and needs and what are proper roles of state government. And with that, we have to have some tough love and reassess a lot of the roles, which have some inefficiencies, maybe some programs that need to be reevaluated, maybe some that the state got into via a federal mechanism and the federal funding is backed out and the state has been left with it. We have to reassess all those things because still cumulatively we're somewhere around 15th or 17th highest in the nation on overall average fee and tax burden.
Yep.
And that's pretty significant for a state with such a rural representation and a rather modest populace.
Now, you mentioned that sometimes the federal government brings, money back to the states, but then if they pull out, we're burdened. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, that can happen with various health and welfare programs, for example, where maybe it's something that the state is mandated to do and the federal match dollars have changed, or maybe it's something that the state had an incentive to opt into, and now finances have changed and the state needs to reassess that, reevaluate whether or not we can truly afford that. We're at a stage right now where we shouldn't necessarily be thinking about what needs to be cut. We're almost to the point of saying, what's the minimum of our proper role and responsibility that we have to fund?
Well, I think that's always good self-evaluation to determine what is the proper role of government and what do we need to handle that. I know that one of your concerns or one of your hot issues is the grocery tax. Would you like to speak about that?
Absolutely, thank you. The grocery tax credit was an effort of several individuals, and a lot of colleagues came together. It has many facets to it that were a lot of concessions and a lot of effort over several years for us to try to address this where we can get enough consensus to move forward. We've always had a stalemate on the issue and on the tax policy in Idaho on food. And this is food that has, genuine qualifying parameters like federal food stamp qualified food. We aren't talking about soda pop and candy bars and such. And Idaho is one of a handful of states which has a credit mechanism. There are pros and cons to that. One of the pros is that your exclusive beneficiaries are Idaho residents, so you maintain revenue from tourism and transient business, etc. The grocery tax credit is an attempt to displace some of that sales tax on the necessities of food, and it was implemented in a fiscally responsible, controlled fashion so that it could become a reality where it takes several years to grow and implement. We front-loaded it a little bit more on the lower income side to facilitate some concerns and some more desperate needs on that end of a spectrum, if you will, amongst Idahoans. And we also did away with the minimum liability threshold for income tax so that some folks that have never been able to qualify because they didn't qualify to file income tax never received the credit, never had an opportunity to.
Now, it's my understanding that whether people file or not, they actually have to apply for this credit or they don't get it. Is that correct?
That is correct in the sense that even if they don't have a reason to file for income liability, it's a simple half-page form they can file and they get the credit.
Yes, I interviewed the speaker a couple of weeks ago, and he said that that's a really important point to make with people because a lot of people don't realize that it's not automatic.
Well, that is a very important point, and we are doing our best and have been to get the word out, and the speaker was kind enough to have an article in today's Idaho Statesman in that behalf and in behalf of the credit and its further implementation. The money that went towards 08, the first increase, has already happened, and people are filing for that right now. Some of the talk in regards to the budget is around the next incremental increase, which would be worth around $15 million. And the reason we didn't put a trigger in there that has economic implications, like we need to have X number of revenue for this trigger to happen, we made it a policy decision. And the reason we did that was because one could build a case that in a down economy, there are situations where the taxpayer, the average Idahoan, would need that money that much more. So it has to be a good policy judgment call. And it's a promise that's out there I feel rather strongly about. And even for, I want to make another point, even for folks that subscribe to tax policy change in regards to Idaho's policy and how we tax food. Once this is fully implemented, we will be somewhere around 3/4 of the money towards that effort, towards displacing all of the tax, the sales tax on food. It allows future debate for your tax policy that is not even really an option on the table now, because of affordability, because of the changes in the budget, and we have to be able to implement things over a course of years in order to budget properly.
Mm-hmm.
That becomes a reality. It becomes a tax debate that otherwise really wouldn't have much of a chance. And, you know, there are pros and cons, again, to each approach. Another pro to the credit, aside from Idahoans being the exclusive beneficiaries, is the cost of implementation. This isn't a new program. We already had this in place. Utah, for better or for worse, when they implemented a change in their tax rate, the government had to subsidize the private sector between $8 and $10 million for all of their registers and for all of their stores and retail business to process all these changes with their rates. So there's a lot more detail to this, and of course we want to spend a minimal amount of money to implement these kind of things.
Well, the bottom line is if we're really actually trying to get some relief out there to people, it can't be much of a relief if it ends up costing them money to, you know, on some of these things. And so I guess you've got to just be very careful on how you go about doing this.
That's correct. And a couple more things really quick on the positive side in this economy. We're also looking for other mechanisms that are unique, that are not just traditional fees or taxes. We're looking at, last year we took measures to facilitate and encourage renewable energy development on state endowment lands.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't cost any Idahoans anything out of their pocket, which is great in this economy. Helps us use our own natural resources. That goes to our public schools, that goes to the economy, that goes to the governor's Project 60 program to have a dramatic increase, sustainable increase in our products that we export from Idaho. There are other things that we are working on that are tax neutral but can help us as a state maximize the realization of our own infrastructure and our own resources.
That is good news, and hopefully as time goes by things will start to improve. But right now I guess the bottom line for you folks is to try and find ways to not raise taxes, and that doesn't look too likely in this session. And what the bottom line is going to be for the taxpayer, I guess we'll know here within the next few weeks. I guess JFAC will be setting their budget toward the end of this month. Is that correct?
We'll start setting budgets after next week.
Okay. All right, and then maybe you can come back on the show and tell us a little bit more about what we can expect from that. Next week, my guest is going to be Representative Lenore Barrett, who is going to be talking about a sovereignty legislation that she's proposing along with Representative Harwood, I believe, and there are some other people involved in that as well. And then I will also have the House Minority Leader, John Rushi, who will be on the program. For those of you who are interested, this program is posted on the internet at www.idaholibertywatch.com. That's idaholibertywatch.com. It gives you an opportunity, since this is pre-recorded and not live, you can make comments, you can ask questions. We will get those questions to the proper people who have been on the program and get the answers back to you, and we'll even address them on future shows. So that's idaholibertywatch.com. I want to thank my guests, Representative JoAn Wood and Representative Cliff Bayer, for being on the program. I'm Elizabeth Allan Hodge. The program is Legislative Watch.